Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions today during this presentation, please type them into the Q&A icon located at the bottom toolbar, and we'll answer them after each presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everyone to the June 7th edition of Crop Talk. And today we're going to have a crop update and going to look at going through a lot of the different crops, talk a little bit about staging and see where they're sitting right now. And then our crop scouting panel, there's been some questions coming in regarding crop conditions, heat conditions, stress, a lot of different things going on. So we'll have some good questions for the panel as well. So with that, we'll get into a bit of the crop update here, and just looking at it right now where we sit as seeding progress. And I guess in a lot of people's mind, we're done. There's some producers out there that still are looking at some seeding of some of the forage crops, those type of crops that are still going in, but the majority right now we're sitting at 97%, which puts us right on our 5-year average, and probably 10% ahead of last year, which actually surprised me a bit because there was a lot of seeding going into the late June last year. So I thought, but 10% I guess is still a little bit. So, but yeah, no, we pretty much got seeding complete. So now we're just in the process of watching the crops emerge and come up and starting to take care of the crops that have been emerged for a while, and looking at getting some weed control. One of the interesting things that I've seen the other day, or seen the last couple of days here, is with all this heat that we've been getting, is our growing degree days. And our growing degree days are definitely going to affect our crop staging. And I think that's something that we started talking about a bit last week, about our crop staging, and for everybody to keep an eye on where they're sitting, because when you look at our growing degree days right now as a province, we're sitting at more than 120% of normal, which is a fair bit. And then I just took a snapshot of some of the Southwest here and where we're sitting, and a lot of the areas are anywhere from 130 to 150% of normal, which is fairly significant. And it's definitely going to mean that the crop is growing for a longer period of time during the day, and because of that, we're advancing. And I think I know even yesterday when I was out in quite a few fields yesterday, I even was surprised to see at some of the staging and how fast some of the crop is growing. I think one of the bigger factors too is that when you look at our rainfall and our percentage of normal rainfall, and this is pretty consistent when you go throughout the whole province. There's a lot of areas that are in that 50 to 70% of normal. We've definitely been getting some storms over the last few days here, and I think it's going to bring some of these areas up a little bit. But I think in general, we're still needing a good general rain across the province would be a bonus right now, just to help that crop get going, because like I mentioned, the crop is growing fast. It's needing the moisture, and without the moisture, we could see some crop that might be a little bit, the early seeded crop that might start showing a little bit of stress later on here as we get going. And we get talking about growing degree days, and you see fall rye fields that are heading out, which second week of June here, and we got fall rye fields in full head. We got winter wheat fields that are flag leaf and early heading kind of stages kind of right now. So that's going to mean for definitely for late July, August, late July harvest for a lot of these crops, which puts them probably right now, I would say, a week to 10 days ahead of normal. And so again, with the winter wheat, we're seeing the flag leaf to heading time period. So just a reminder for everybody that it's time to start watching for your fungicide application and for fusarium timing, because we're definitely not too far off that timing. we've been getting high humidity, and a lot of areas have been getting some rains. So I think the decision for spraying is going to be kind of a localized decision this year, more as a kind of a general one, because I think some areas are going to be dry, and those areas may not have as much of an issue with fusarium as compared to the areas that have been getting the rainfalls. Rainfall, high humidity is definitely favorable for fusarium development. On the opposite end of that, there's a few areas where some producers are concerned that we may start losing some of those tillers on some of the winter wheat crop and the fall rye crop, just because it might be running out of moisture, and so we might start to lose some of those tillers if we don't get a rainfall fairly quickly here. So we got a lot of things happening with without the not getting the general rainfall, and so with conditions being in some areas, I'm not going to say too wet, but some areas that are adequate with moisture, and then other areas that are needing a rainfall. So that's going to be something that unless we get a general rainfall, something we're going to deal with for the next little while here. Looking at peas, most of the peas are in good conditions. They're growing quickly. And again, one thing again to watch for is the staging. And you look at these peas here; they haven't really covered the ground yet, but they're only probably that 6 to 8 inches high, but they're definitely going through their growth stages. And we talked a bit about this last week with Dennis and Kim when we were talking about staging peas for spraying. And the best time to spraying is kind of in that 3 to 6 node stage. And when you get looking at a lot of these peas, we're definitely going to be approaching the outer limits, because looking at the pea that I have in my hand there right now, and as Dennis was mentioning last week, you look at the clasping leaves, and there was 6 on this plant, and on the following one here, there is 6 as well. So a lot of the peas are in that stage where you're, I guess, where you still need to get it sprayed. You can see there's weeds there, but need to be really cautious now of what you're spraying and the timing of spraying, because you can start doing some more damage to some of the peas. And I think right now, with the heat and with the conditions we have, you really want to be very conscious of when you're spraying, and crop tolerance. I think that's one of the biggest things. Is we're seeing a lot of starting to see some yellowing of some of the peas that producers have been spraying, because again, they're growing fast. Spraying needs to get done, so producers are spraying later evenings, trying to get maybe a tank off in the morning before it gets too hot. I guess my advice would be to be spraying in the evenings, because then at least you got more time for that crop to stay on the cool side and away from our extreme heats of the afternoon. So if you could spray in the evening, definitely a benefit. But if you're falling behind, that one tank in the morning, where you still have, maybe 2 or 3 hours before we start getting into that 12 or 1 o'clock range, where we're starting to see some of those peak heats, especially the last couple of days. By 12 o'clock, we were in the 30s already. So definitely should be looking at shutting down well before then. Barley and some of the cereal crops. Cereals range from anywhere from 1 to 4 leaf stage, and herbicides are being applied on most fields, as I guess as producers, it comes in order for them to spray. But again, these crops, may not be overly tall, but they're definitely going through their staging. And this is the barley plant from that same field I was in. And when you look at its staging right now, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 leaf and 1 tiller on this one already. So you're definitely in the stage where herbicide application needing to be done, but you definitely don't see the plant. It hasn't really elongated very much, so it's not very tall yet, but you're in a stage where herbicide application and our timing is critical right now, because once you get a little bit bigger, then again, your some of your products aren't going to be advisable, or some of them might be hotter on the crop at that time period, and just needing to be on top of what you're doing. Wheat, a lot of the wheat crop that was planted early is definitely growing fast right now. They're going to be soon with a lot of fields. It's going to be filling in rows. Here's a plant that I picked yesterday. That's when you look at it, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 leaf and 2 tillers already. So again, you're getting to that stage where you're wanting to make sure you're on top of your spraying and making sure that you have a plan and getting those ones sprayed before they get too much bigger. One of the crops that I think I've seen probably the most variance in is canola right now, and the early seeded canola, as you can see in the one picture there, is definitely and again, this is in the southwest of most of these pictures were taken. I'm imagining in other parts of the province they may be even farther advanced than this, and probably are. But I've seen some talk of producers saying that they're starting to cabbage out and cover the ground already, which is really far advanced. But around in the southwest of the province here, the early seeded canola is getting its second and third leaf already. So it won't be long for it to start branching out. I'm really seeing those crops have gotten ahead of any flea beetle feeding and are doing fairly well. And I think are probably past the stage now where producers are going to need to worry a whole bunch about flea beetles. On the other side, or the flip side, we got the later seeded canola, which is the picture on the right. And you can see that, we're still in the cotyledon stage. One of the things I'm finding in these crops is that, well, a couple of things was finding the last couple of days is that some of that seed is sitting in dry ground. Probably sown during some of those hot and windy days. So wherever the seed was placed, a lot of times when you move soil to that move or open up the soil, those winds were drying it right down. So if they haven't received any moisture over the last little while, a lot of those seeds are still sitting in dry ground. The other thing that I always caution producers against is seeding too deep, and in some cases too, when it was starting the top inch and a half was getting fairly dry, some producers were starting to go a little deeper and try to get the seed into moisture. Well, a lot of times, you'll get the seed into moisture, but it then struggles to get through the ground. So the later seeded canola right now is definitely showing, I guess, more stress. And kind of to add on to that, I guess what I've been seeing too is I've been seeing some issues with flea beetles on some of those later seeded canola crops. And I think it's the same thing we see every year, right? You don't get the fast germination like you see on the left-hand side of the screen, where the canola is up and has covered the ground and going through its leaf progression fairly fast. There's some holes in some of those early leaves, but the plant has been growing and coming up fast. So it's definitely keeping ahead of the flea beetles. With the later seeded ones, you get 50% of the seeds germinate and come through, and then all of a sudden the rest are sitting there waiting for some moisture to get going, and then the flea beetles, it's all of a sudden a 2-to-1 kind of ratio of flea beetles to plants as compared to when you got a good stand coming through. So going to see more feeding on those plants. You're going to see more holes in those plants, and I think that's something where I've been talking to some producers where they've been eyeing some fields. And then I've been talking to some producers, and I think some of it is a little bit of a scared issue because of last year. and all the factors that we had with flea beetles. And a lot of producers aren't waiting to give the seed treatments a good chance to work. And I always tell the guys, you should look at the percentage of defoliation before you need to look at spraying. And I think John did a good talk about that last week when he was mentioning and showing pictures of the 25% defoliation before to go out there. But it's hard to argue with producers when you've got spotty germination, and you've got half your plants up, and then you've got flea beetles feeding. You're worried about the amount of plants that still might come up, so you're trying to keep every plant you have. So I can understand why they're maybe going out and maybe jumping the gun a little bit, just to keep on top of the flea beetles to make sure they're not going to damage too many of the plants that are there. And there's, I guess, a lot of the comments that I made, and you can see the damage on the picture on the top right here is a picture from that field where we had early germination. You got the 2 true leaves and another leaf just starting to come out, as compared to, a spot even where there's, fairly good seed germination coming through the ground here, but definitely a lot more feeding damage on these leaves. And a situation where you definitely need to keep on top of it to make sure you're not going to lose too many of those plants. It's hard to get everything planted early, but definitely we were seeing this year where the early seed of canola is definitely taking advantage of 2 things: taking advantage of the moisture, and also taking advantage of maybe not as much feeding, because it's getting ahead of the flea beetles. Flax, kind of one of our later seeded crops, and it just is something that happens on a yearly basis. I guess producers usually just don't get the flax in because, I guess, like I mentioned, it'd be nice to get everything in early, but you can't. And the flax is doing, I guess, okay. The heat is definitely affecting some of the smaller plants, and you could see in the picture on the left there where some of the young seedlings are showing the effects of heat yesterday, where they come through the ground and just probably don't have a great root establishment into the good moisture yet, and just showing the effects of heat. But the crop is advancing fairly well across the province. A lot of them are the 4 to 5 leaf stage, or 5 growth stage. And if we definitely got a rain, it'd be advancing fairly quick. I know there's been a lot of talk lately, from whether you talk to the chem reps, or you talk to the even last week when Kim was on. This is one crop that you definitely need to watch with when you're getting out there to spray. Crop that'll definitely show symptoms fairly fast, so especially in the heat. So it's the answer for spraying in this kind of weather or this kind of heat is no. And if you have to spray, spray at night, so it could at least get part of the night before it needs to start going into the heat of the day, because you're going to see probably the biggest effect of the heat on flax. Next crop I'm going to talk a little bit about is soybeans, and I asked Amir to maybe make a few comments. Amir is kind of one of the guys in the Southwest here that deals with a lot of the pulse stuff. So Amir, are you on?
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
You bet, Amir.
Okay. So soybean is also progressing well in the Southwest region. So most of crop is from unifoliate to first trifoliate stage. So here in this picture, we can see that this is kind of a unifoliate, like first unrolled unifoliate leaves. And for our different operations like rolling and for the weed management, it's very important that we should know the staging of the crop. So soybean and Pulse Association, they have a very good resource on their website. So if you go there, you can see this is kind of their soybean growth staging guide. So this one here, this most of crop in here in southwest region is this is unifoliate. This is kind of at this stage, and next one is first trifoliate stage. So soybean seedlings are poor competitors against weeds. So it's very important to get the highest yield potential. So if we can control weeds before V3, like the trifoliate stage. So at that time, if we can get our weed control, so that will be best for the crop. And also for the rolling, as mentioned maybe Dennis Lang before, so it's very important that if we can do before V3 stage to less damage to the crop if we did not do the rolling just after seeding. So for that reason, and it's very important that we should know the staging of the crop as well.
Thanks, Amir. Yeah, that's definitely seeing, like you mentioned, a lot of the soybeans that are up, and I think one of the crops that maybe like the heat, or maybe not this kind of heat, but likes the warmer conditions, so we'll probably be advancing fairly fast. So I think within the next week or so, a lot of producers will be doing some spraying if it's not happening already in some areas. So thanks, Amir. Okay, so that's a bit of the crop update. Just wanted to go through a few of the crops, and I think the biggest thing I wanted to stress today was the timing wise and staging of the crops. I think we definitely need to be getting out there, making sure or making our decisions on staging, because we're seeing the crop develop fairly fast this year. So into the crop scouting panel, and as I mentioned, we've been getting some calls coming in and regarding crops as to certain things happening in the field. And one of the first ones was a call about barley, and Bruce was talking about is just the barley wasn't. The older leaves were still not bad, but kind of the third and fourth leaves were starting to show some yellowing, and he took some pictures and sent them to me, and I gave Dave Kaminsky a call and see maybe if Dave would want to maybe make a few comments regarding what he's been seeing, and he mentioned he'd been getting some calls as well.
Yes, good morning, Lionel. While you were talking, I've been scrambling to throw together a little bit of a presentation on this question because it is intriguing. I'm getting a lot of calls about yellowing in cereal crops, not just barley, but also wheat. And let's see if I can share my screen. Okay, if I
You bet, yeah.
take over here. Can you see my cover slide? Why is my barley or wheat crop yellow?
Not yet,
Not-
nope.
No.
Not yet. Oh, sorry. There's the share screen 2. Always a scramble.
There you go.
How about
Perfect.
now? Okay, good. So, yeah, I've had calls over the last week. The first one from Harold Brown, my friend with, I believe it's Bayer now, and he had this barley crop or picture sent to him from the Binscarth area, and there is yellowing of the tips of the leaves of barley, and the distribution in the field was pretty much over the whole field, not patches or not the edge of the field. And so we discussed a number of possibilities. After some discussion, we kind of ruled out the idea of it being barley yellow dwarf, which is one of the things that first leaps to mind. And then just yesterday, I got a text from a person in the Pilot Mound area. I'm crediting these slides just with first names because I've not asked these people if I can use their pictures, but we're seeing generally the same thing, yellowing of the tips of the leaves, and the distribution in this case, I believe, was more patchy and sometimes towards the edge of the field. So maybe a stronger suspicion of a barley yellow dwarf. So what is barley yellow dwarf disease? Well, we often leap straight to pictures, and these are some pictures from my favorite resource, which is called Diseases of Field Crops in Canada. And yellowing of the tips of leaves, it's definitely an early symptom of barley yellow dwarf. Another thing that you would see in infected plants is that they are somewhat stunted. And the distribution in the field would be generally along the edges because of there being a source of the virus, or if it was general, it might be because the vectors have brought the virus in from somewhere else. That's a good possibility, actually. And yeah, I'll just jump to the next slide, which is the cover of Disease of Field Crops in Canada, if you're not familiar. But I want to show you a key paragraph. I don't know if you'll be able to read it on your screens, but it says that in Canada, there are 5 species of grass-feeding aphids that are responsible for spreading barley yellow dwarf on cereal crops. And most of the time that infection is coming into Canada with aphids that are blown here on strong southerly winds from the United States, and they would have to be carrying the virus with them. We do have these aphids that feed on cereals locally, but they die off every winter because they can't really survive the winter here. So we wouldn't expect locally produced aphids to be responsible. And if there was any chance that there were locally surviving aphids, they would have to first pick up the virus from a source that is something like winter wheat, which may preserve the virus in live tissue. Now, we haven't had reports of barley yellow dwarf for quite a number of years, so I think this is also rather unlikely. Now, I'm jumping back to Lionel's first slide on the cover. Again, yellow tips on the leaves, but Lionel is, or told me that these are on the lower leaves. Now, I guess you see that caption up there that suggests it's on the older leaves. And that might be something that is not completely typical of barley yellow dwarf, where you'd see the yellowing on the newest leaves. What are the things that cause yellowing on lower leaves? And I see Marla is on the call, so she'll be familiar with the picture on the right. We had a little discussion with a grower down in the Killarney area who had these patches or even stripes in the field of yellowed, I believe this is wheat, not barley. And one of the things I pointed out to them was that there seems to be a fairly high trash residue level in those patches. And is that consistent? So Marla, what was my theory and what other things did you talk to this producer about?
Thanks, David. I have had a bit of a back and forth conversation with the producer about a few things. Some of the questions that I was asking as I was looking at this was questions about soil type. Previous crop was canola. It's hard to see in this photo. It's not a very consistent area. Sometimes when we're looking at things like a potential for potassium deficiency, then if it's been canola and that canola had been swathed, we would end up seeing the deficiency showing up between the previous swaths. And you'd actually have a greening area showing up where the canola had been lying in the swath. And that happens because potassium is mobile in the plant, but not mobile in the soil. So if you think about if it had been a previous canola crop that was growing that takes up potassium, and then you kind of concentrate that potassium where it's lying in the swath, and maybe you get some rain on that swath before it's actually been combined, then you would have some of that potassium leach out. So that's a very typical potassium deficiency that we can see in some situations, usually on sandier soils. Now, this particular case didn't look exactly like that. Still don't really know what the true cause of this type of patchiness is. It's hard to see without other issues. The producer also wondered about possibility of zinc deficiencies. It is a previously manured field, and so if it had a history of really high phosphorus amounts because of a lot of manure applied in the past, sometimes that can interfere with zinc uptake. And so that would be something we might see, say, in a corn crop, that type of thing. But again, the phosphorus levels on this particular field are somewhere in the realm of 12 to 15 parts per million, not very high, agronomically perfectly fine. So that doesn't seem to be the issue either. So we still haven't really pinpointed it. However, the one thing that we are doing, or that the producer is doing, is taking tissue tests. So when you see something like this and you end up thinking that it might actually be some sort of nutrient deficiency, there are very classic symptoms of seeing, the yellowing of leaves at, say, lower leaves, upper, like new growth, whether it's mid-rib yellowing in certain like different areas that are kind of firing off or yellowing within the plant. They can be classic symptoms, but often you only know once you've done a tissue test. And so in this case, what the producer is doing is taking a tissue test in the poor growing area as well as in the good growing area. And that way we can actually do a comparison to figure out what to do about it. If it's the small areas of the field, we might not be worrying too much about, a minor deficiency in one area versus another. If it's larger tracts or larger areas, depending on what the deficiency is, we may be able to look at rescue treatments. But there's no point in really jumping the gun on trying to spray something with a micro if you don't know whether or not it's actually a micronutrient deficiency. So it's important to get those tissue tests done and, wait that extra couple of days to get that result back.
That's great, Marla. And is there any possibility that this could be nitrogen being tied up by that high residue load on the surface of the soil?
So because in the photo we're seeing, it does look like there is a little bit more canola residue at that surface. If we had seen, say, broadcasting of nitrogen on that surface, I would suspect that there could be a higher rate of immobilization of nitrogen, just as that nitrogen basically is being used for the purpose of breaking down that crop residue. That being said, the fertilizer or the nutrient application in this case is through hog manure that was injected. If you are injecting or your either manure or you are banding your fertilizer, your nitrogen fertilizer, away from that residue left at the surface, there is a very reduced chance of that immobilization happening because you're not putting that nitrogen fertilizer in contact directly with that stubble. So if you were tilling it in, broadcasting, having really high contact, a lot higher chance of that immobilization happening. Again, when immobilization happens, it's a short-term tie-up or loss of that nitrogen. Eventually it will be remobilized or mineralized essentially and released back to that crop. It just might not be getting into the crop that you're growing right now, and it might be released, say, for next year. So if you are worried about immobilization of your nitrogen fertilizer, broadcasting onto stubble, tilling that all in, that is going to be kind of the less preferred way of applying your fertilizer. Banding is always the best way to go because it keeps it less in contact with that residue, so it decreases that risk of immobilization.
Excellent, thanks, Marla. And I have jumped back one slide because I talked about insects, where that's not really my area. And I hope I've given John Gavlosky a little bit of a heads up to talk about the possibility of aphids having blown into our area. He has heard, of course, of leaf hoppers blowing into our area, possibly carrying something like aster yellows. I think he's investigating that possibility. But John, you're on the line. You want to take over at this point?
Sure. So Yes, we have had some aster leafhoppers blow in. I've been getting samples collected, and actually some very keen agronomists have been collecting samples as well and sending them in to me. And right now I have them sent to a lab to be tested for the aster yellows pathogen. It seems that the western part of the province is where we are seeing more of the aster leafhoppers that got blown in. But the big thing really is going to be how infected are they? And we're still waiting for the answer to that question. Regarding aphids, the only aphids I've really been seeing so far are the ones I've been sweeping out of alfalfa, the pea aphid, which is one that can overwinter here to some degree. I haven't seen or heard of any aphids in cereals yet. So no English grain aphid, no oat bird cherry aphid. Oat bird cherry aphid is the major vector of barley yellow dwarf. There are other aphids that can vector it, but not with the same efficiency as the oat bird cherry. And again, I've had no reports of oat bird cherry. So in a case like this where you're seeing that yellowing, one thing you could do is look and see if you can find aphids. But once again, I've had no reports at all of the vectors of barley yellow dwarf or any of the other aphids in cereals yet.
Mhm. Thanks, John. You can see I've jumped back another couple of slides, and the image on the right discussed with the grower. They were concerned about, or the agronomist, pardon me, they were concerned that the previous crop was soybean, and that on that soybean crop, there were a lot of aphids. She's not seeing aphids in this field, but was concerned about those aphids. Again, that is a different aphid, which does not vector this pathogen that we're talking about, and neither would those survive the winter, even if they there were a lot of aphids here. So without the evidence of the vector, you have to be strongly suspicious that this is not something like barley yellow dwarf. It's a thing that leaps straight to mind, but I'd say right now the chances are a little remote. And these symptoms are showing up in widely disparate areas. That's not a pocket where you might have had a bunch of aphids blow in and be deposited in an area. So is that enough for now, Lionel? Are there any
Okay,
questions?
yeah, I just had a comment come in saying that I'm seeing this in my barley on low spots throughout the field.
In low spots. Okay, well, that is a patch distribution, and there is probably a soil and or moisture explanation in that case.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a good comment. Yeah. Okay,
So I'll give the screen back to you, or can you take it back?
I will take it back.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, David, Marla,
And John, you've lost it.
and John, sorry. I got a couple more questions here I think will be coming up for John, but before I do that, this is for Kim. I had a agronomist send me this picture, and he was seen it in the ditch and kind of in that Shoal Lake area, and was wanting to identify it and then also what he can use to control it.
Yeah, that's milkweed. That is a perennial weed, and seeing it more and more. And for the longest time, we've really only seen it in ditches. But as I, travel around the province and get to work more in the central region, which, I haven't worked here for quite a while now, or seeing a lot more of this in fields. So that's something to be really careful. If you're just seeing it in ditches and field edges right now, just really do some patch control on that. Mowing it, don't let that set seed. There's lots of seed. They're extremely viable. They can germinate very readily, and they have a very, very deep root system. So they become a perennial plant very quickly after germination. So the problem is, one of the big problems with this is we don't have a lot of good chemistry to go after this with. We used to have Amitrol. We do not have that anymore. I know there's been guys hoarding jugs of Amitrol in their sheds to do spot spraying with. Amitrol is gone. and we are not supposed to be using it anymore. So either way, that option is no longer available to most of us anymore. And so after that, you're really looking at either glyphosate or something like dicamba. So in crop spraying, you know, you're looking at if those are products that you can use in whatever crop you've got it in. But then a pre-harvest spraying with glyphosate can help as well. But again, this is a perennial weed, so if we can do something to control that root system. But these will start to occur in really large patches, and it is really important to get on these patches before they get out of control and it becomes field-wide, because this is a really tough weed to control. It is just naturally tolerant to most chemistry. We just don't have very many options. Like I said, it's dicamba and glyphosate. So your in-crop options are extremely limited to crops that those products can be used in. So it's not good news, but keep, get on it before it gets bad and starts moving into the crops, because we are seeing it more and more in crop rather than just on the edge of the crop in the ditches.
Yeah, and it kind of surprised me too, because I used to see it kind of in the southern part of the province, kind of south of number 1 highway, and I never really seen it this far north before. So it kind of surprised me to see the picture as well.
Yeah, no, I've been getting pictures in from north of Dauphin, and so there's just more and more of it. People don't know what it is. If you're not, I think it's quite easy to identify. Even when it's small, it does have these big leathery leaves, and it's got a quite prominent mid vein there. The veins are very orderly. If you see off the pictures, they're quite nice and neat. There's not a lot of net venation on there. The leaves are opposite, and so there's these big leathery leaves, and when you pull a leaf off, you get a lot of like sticky white sap, like you would on a dandelion or something else. So it's pretty easy to identify even at a very small stage. It just has these big leaves and that white sap, and the vein pattern is pretty distinctive as well. But
Great.
Again, a lot of people are sending in pictures because they've never seen it before, but it's moving around the province a lot more.
Good, thanks, Kim. John Gavosky, I was out in some pea fields yesterday, and we're in the start of a pea leaf weevil survey, and I was wondering if you wanted to make a few comments about I guess what we're doing, and the picture in the top right hand corner with the notches in the leaf. Is that what we're looking for?
Yes, and thanks for bringing that up, Lionel. So what you're seeing, the leaves in that top picture, there's little notches in them. It almost looks like someone took a hole puncher and punched a couple semi holes at the edge of the leaf. So that's feeding by the adult stage of an insect called pea leaf weevil, a relatively newer insect in Manitoba. And we're seeing populations, particularly in the western part of the province, rise, particularly in the northwest. We are doing a survey for this insect. We're trying to track first its distribution and also its relative abundance. Saskatchewan and Alberta have been doing these surveys for years, and we're trying to collect data as well. And the survey is actually fairly simple to do. You look at a plant, and if you see notches like that, you record it as notching on the plant, and especially if it's on the clam leaf, then you would mark that separately as clam leaf having notching. Anyone can do this, but if you're scouting peas or in pea fields, I would encourage you to scout some plants and take some notes for our survey. Our survey does suggest to have a look at 50 plants. Now, if that's going to be too time consuming, you're having a quick look at a field and you won't have time for that. Even to have a look at, say, 20 plants and say, do they have notching or don't they, is good. 50 is ideal, but whatever can be done is terrific. I'm going to be doing a little write-up on this for today's Manitoba Crop Pest Update, and I'm going to attach a data sheet when I send out the notification later in the day, and I'll put the protocol in the update. So if anybody is scouting peas and is noticing these notching, and even if you're not noticing the notching, zeros are good data too. If you'd like to participate in that survey, by all means, we would certainly welcome your data.
Okay, good. Thanks, John.
Oh, one more thing, Lionel, that I should mention, that feeding that the adults do, that's really not economical. It's cosmetic. What pea leaf weevil does, the larval stage, so they lay their eggs and the larvae are feeding on the nodules on the roots. They don't feed on the roots, they feed on the nodules. So in peas, we rely on the nodules to produce nitrogen for the plant. And really the problem with pea leaf weevil is if you lose too many nodules, then you're going to have nitrogen deficient plants. And that's the reason pea leaf weevil is of concern, is because of that feeding the larva can do to the nodules. That feeding on the leaves, that's just what we measure to know what our levels are like, but that's not the economic damage that we're worried about with this insect.
Okay, good point, John. And while you're still on there, John, I was on some alfalfa fields, or one alfalfa field yesterday, and you know, just like the report, our crop report mentioned, the alfalfa starting to flower, just nicely starting to flower in some areas. So, you know, I guess good for dairy quality feed. I think, you know, for beef guys, we're probably going to be a few days away yet before most guys are ready to start taking cuts. But then I also noticed some feeding on the upper leaves there, and was wondering if you wanted to maybe make a few comments on what that might be.
Sure. So that looks to me like I would call it minor feeding damage by alfalfa weevil. So alfalfa weevil, much like pea leaf weevil, it's a weevil, bit bigger weevil. Once again, it's the larval stage that does more of the damage. The larvae are relatively tiny, green, and I can't use the word caterpillars because they're a weevil larva, but they almost look like a caterpillar. They don't have any legs though, so no true legs on them, so they don't move far. And they'll be green with a white stripe down the back and a black head cap. So that's alfalfa weevil. That's likely what was doing that. I haven't had any reports of big numbers yet, and just sweeping the alfalfa at our research farm here in Carmen, I'm just starting to find the larvae now. So you might notice a bit more of this over the next couple of weeks before they start turning into pupa. If anyone is seeing a lot of it, I'd be curious to know where we're seeing higher levels, but so far haven't had any big reports of this. One way to deal with it, if it's alfalfa that's being cut, is just to cut the alfalfa a little bit on the early side. As mentioned, they don't have any legs, they can't move too far. So when you do your cut, essentially they're going to starve or desiccate after that cut's been done. Unless you get really very quick regrowth, then you might get some survival, but a good control strategy is just cutting a little on that early side if convenient to do so. And sometimes that alone could provide really good control.
Okay, and then one question that I had, John, being that we're seeing an increase in our growing degree days, are we going to see some insects coming up a little bit earlier or developing a little bit quicker this year?
We definitely can, and while insects in general rely on heat to get through their stages, so that, and generally to a certain point, the warmer it is, the quicker they go through those stages. Now, once we get into the 30s, there are some insects that you do reach a point where it's actually detrimental, but for most of them, they do go through their stages quicker when we have more degree days. So grasshoppers are hatching out now, and often it's well into July before we start seeing adults. You might notice they start going through their stages a bit quicker in a warmer summer, and it might be, say, mid-July instead of late July, early August when we start seeing the adults. That could happen. Things like Bertha armyworm, which we're starting to monitor for now, we might notice that they're out flying around a bit earlier, and that egg laying is happening a bit earlier. So it does speed up the cycles of these insects. And for some that do blow in, like diamondback moth, and go through multiple cycles. In a cooler year, we might go through, say, 3 cycles. In a warmer year, it could be 4 or 5 cycles. which depending on parasitoid and natural enemy loads could lead to a higher population. But that's not a given because sometimes also the parasitoids respond well, and those later generations aren't necessarily higher. That's a hit and miss thing.
Okay, and a question that just came in, would this mean we could see wheat midge in earlier this year?
Well, wheat midge does overwinter here. And once again, they rely on degree days for their development. They also need a little bit of moisture, though, for them to complete that transition. So areas with very dry soil that just haven't had much rain, it might be delayed a bit because of that. But areas where you've got good moisture, yes, is the short answer. We could see wheat midge out. On some years, it's even July before we really start to see much of the adults flying around. Other years, it can be late June. And I would expect this year we could start seeing the wheat midge at least starting their emergence in June, probably that 3rd or 4th week in June.
Okay, good. Thanks, John. Yeah, I guess this one came in, but I think we've dealt with this one before. Unless, Kim, you want to make a few comments about staging and the application of products like manipulator or growth regulators.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not as well versed on manipulator and growth regulators. I just we do have staging guides available. I'm not sure, we don't really have one in the guide. Our staging and our guide to crop protection is more for herbicide applications. But the manipulator staging, if you look in the guide to crop protection, we do have a growth regulator section, and it is in between it's actually right after the herbicides, and so they're very specific, the staging that needs to be at. So I don't have a Zadoc scale right with me that I can show you guys. But if you are looking, you need to follow the label really carefully on those. So our plant growth regulators are on page 467 in our guide. And so we have manipulator and we have modus as well. And they're looking at the BBCH, or that's the scale, the growth charts. For modus, you're looking at 30 to 39. And a manipulator is a little bit less specific. They're not really using like the growth stage, the growth charts like we would use for modus, but they talk about from beginning of stem elongation to 2 stem nodes visible. So lots of times the stem nodes, those are like the bumpy bits on the main stem. And so a wheat plant that big, I would say it's got 1 node for sure, and probably the 2nd node for sure. You can feel it down there. But their staging for barley and oats is 2 stem nodes detectable, not visible. So you need to, if you can feel those bumps, if you can feel those nodes on the stem, then that's what they're talking about when they're talking about detecting stem nodes. So the 2 products have very different ways of staging. Again, one is using the BBCH growth charts, and the other one is just talking about nodes. And so some of us might be familiar with nodes when we're looking at certain products, when we have to like stop spraying certain products like a Vero or a Velocity, when there's nodes detectable in the stem. So yeah, so if you're looking at that, just be really careful which product you're putting on, and get yourself a copy of that BBCH chart, and it's pretty clear on the staging. It's good to have that visual chart.
Great, thank you, Kim. And as Kim mentioned, our field crop production guides are available at all Ag Service Centers. And if you're also needing one, you can also contact your Ag Extension specialist, and they can help you get them. And they're available and a handy tool to have in your sprayer, water truck. Probably get 2 or 3 of them. I mentioned last week that there was going to be a fencing and watering workshop, and I was a little off on some of my locations. So I just wanted to let everybody know that there is 3 locations. One's on June 13th, one's June 14th, and the other one is on June 14th. But one's in the Dauphin area, one's in the Beausejour area, and one's kind of in that St. Laurent and Inwood area. So there are locations on the advertisement right there, and there's going to be some talking about electric fencing, solar watering. Your watershed districts are going to be there, and they're going to be talking about programs they have, I would imagine. And then Manitoba Ag will be there talking about managing grazing, and I think that's probably something that we may need to look at this year if we're not going to get a good general rainfall. We might need to be looking at more of maybe some rotational grazing. So probably some good information. There's our livestock specialists and their contact information. So if you're interested in going to those workshops, I'm sure you could just get a hold of any one of these people, and they'll be able to let you know locations and let you know what's happening there. I think there's lunch at most of them too. So it's going to be a good day of learning there. Our ag diversification centers are planned their days for their summer tours. So the Wado tour is on July 9th, your Passaic tour is on July 27th, PCDF is on August 2nd, and MCDC is on August 9th. So we're going to be having somebody from each of the sites talk about the different projects going on in their locations, probably beginning of July. And so they'll be go over, and then you'll be able to find out what's going on at the different sites and find out which one you want to attend, or if you want to attend all four of them. So there's a lot of good information, a lot of good stuff happening there. So definitely keep those dates available. Again, the Farmer Day for the crop diagnostic schools on Friday, July 7th. And that's paid for by MCA, Manitoba Pulse Growers and Canola Growers. So definitely, if you're a producer and want to go, you need to pre-register, and then they'll have everything organized for you when you get there. Marla, any news on the other days yet? The registration open?
Oh,
Okay, maybe Marla had to step aside there for a second, but okay, maybe Marla had to step aside.
Sorry,
there for a
we're
second,
just.
if you're wanting to find out, just okay. Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry, we're just trying to find the screen here for the mute button. Yeah, so Farmer Day, or not, well, Farmer Day is open. So any farmers who are on the call, registration to mbcropschool@gmail.com. That is on the 7th. Regular registration is also open. And so if anybody is interested in registering, you will do the same thing by emailing us at mbcropschool@gmail.com. We need your name, your company name, your contact information. So email is most important, phone number, what day you want to register. So the dates that we have this year are July 5th and 6th. So that's the Wednesday and Thursday prior to this Farmer Day. And then July 11th to 13th, which is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of the following week. And so there are spots available right now for all days. Registrations are pouring in. The cost for regular registration is $175 per person. Again, it's a one-day event. And yeah, if you're interested, feel free to send that email to mbcropschool@gmail.com. We did send out a registration notification to people on our mailing list, but if you're not on our mailing list, now you know how to get there. So you can also send us direct emails, and we can put that link. I can probably send some stuff to Lori to also send in the email out with the recording today.
Great, that's a good idea. Thanks, Marla. Our crop production extension specialists, our locations and contact information. So if you got something happening out in the field, please feel free to contact us. We like finding out what's going on and seeing if we can help you get through some stuff that maybe we can't figure out, or we can figure out together. So don't be scared to contact any one of them. MASC service centers, seeding deadlines are starting to come up. So if you're still doing a little bit of seeding, definitely keep on top of those. And if you need to know specifics, you could easily contact one of the offices, and there's their phone numbers to let you know what's going on, or if you need information from MASC. And I guess with that, that's it for today. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending. I'd like to thank our panelists and join us next week, June 14th for the next edition of Crop Talk.